Hello, everyone. Good morning from Santo Domingo, and good afternoon and good evening in different parts of the world. My name is Leticia Berrispeitia. I'm going to share my webcam now so you can see me. Hello. And I am the Capacity Development Analyst at the UN Women Training Center, and of course, very glad to welcome you today to this online session that we have titled Feminist Pedagogies and Training for Gender Equality, a Paradox. This also serves as an introduction and an overview of the professional development program for gender trainers that we deliver in close partnership with the Royal Tropical Institute KIT. In your screens, you will see now our content map for today. So it's a brief outline of today's presentation. We will begin it with several notes on logistics and how this webinar works and how to get feedback and questions to us. Then we will go on and introduce today's expert panelists. I will have the pleasure to do that. Also, we will continue with our conversation about feminist pedagogies and also a quick overview of the professional development program of gender trainers. Finally, at the end, we will have some time for responding some of your questions or the questions you may have during the session. So about the logistics, this is very important to us because we want to hear you and we want to have feedback from you and receive your questions. So please note that you can type your doubts and comment at any time during the webinar today at the control pane that you will find at the right side of your screens. There's a chat box right there below the question function, and there is where you should add them. Please note that we will be compiling the questions during the session. So the sooner you get it to us, the more probably that they will be included in the final Q&A. So if you have any pressing question or if you are thinking about something while you are listening to the panelists, please type the questions in and don't wait until the end. That would be our recommendation. So also, please note that in the case that we are not able to address some of these questions during the webinar because of time constraints, we can follow up later on by email. You already have my email address in your inboxes because you should have received it with the webinar invitation. All the same, I just put it here on your screens. It's leticia.berrispeitia@unwomen.org. So secondly, also note that this webinar is being recorded right now as we speak, and we're going to make it available through our UN Women Training Center YouTube channel once the session has ended. Again, if you're here, that means that you're registered to this webinar and that you will receive a follow-up email with this recording among other resources, but also please know that you can find this recording along with many other of our recordings at our YouTube channel, searching UN Women Training Center YouTube. Finally, if you're connected and you are experiencing any connectivity issues or low bandwidth, please note that you also have the option in the upper menu. You will see in the upper side of your screen a menu with it's a drop-down menu when you can select if you want to view our web cameras or not. So we recommend that if you're experiencing these difficulties, to hide the webcams, which is the last option on the first drop-down menu. So you will see that when you do that, the connection should improve and you should be able to listen to us if not seeing us. Okay, so moving on, I have the pleasure to introduce today's panelists. Oh, wait, okay, now I have the right screen. I was saying that I am very happy to introduce today's panelists, who are two of our colleagues from the partner institution, the Royal Tropical Institute KIT. And they are Dr. Moitri Mukhopadhyay and Dr. Franz Wong. They will be leading this discussion today, the discussion on feminist pedagogies and training for gender equality. So if you can put your cameras on, Franz and Moitri, to say hi to the audience.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, welcome.
Okay, excellent. So Dr. Moitri is a social anthropologist specialized in social development with a focus on gender and development. She has 30 years experience in gender and development research, advisory work, teaching, and training. Dr. Franz Wong, he first started working in gender issues in 1991 and has been a gender specialist for over 10 years with work experience in East and South Asia, as well as East and Southern Africa and the Middle East. He specializes in gender mainstreaming, policy and practice, including organization assessment such as gender audits, and strategy development for research centers, multilateral and bilateral development agencies, and NGOs. So thank you both so much, Franz and Moitri, for being with us today.
Thanks, Leticia.
I will be, yes, just to let know the audience how this is going to go. I'm going to make Franz and Moitri some questions for us to clarify and to present the program and some of the important topics such as feminist pedagogy. So let's begin the conversation. To begin with, Franz and Moitri, we framed this session as a discussion on feminist pedagogy, so we should start there. What are feminist pedagogies? So whoever of you who want to start.
Okay, thanks, Leticia. Well, we do adopt the UN Women Training Center idea of feminist pedagogy, and basically what that does mean, it's about a way of learning and participatory learning. And part of that is also recognizing, acknowledging the personal experience that trainees bring to their training and their learning. So they're not empty vessels. They actually do have histories and context, and that's in part what one needs to take into account and build upon. But ultimately, it's really about justice in the world, gender justice, and training is not just training's sake, but there is a wider purpose of this, no matter how bounded, even if it's a one-day training, we should be keeping that in mind. Secondly, we are working in development, and development is not necessarily given, it is a social construct. So we really need to be critical, be able to reflect critically about what is development and our role in it. So part of another feminist pedagogy principle is this development of critical thinking and reflection.
Yeah, just to add that all these elements are actually integrated into what we consider to be feminist pedagogies. So it's not that you pick and choose, we'll do this and not the other, but it is that they are integrated in your whole approach. And that's what feminist pedagogies are.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you both so much. That makes a lot of sense. So the next question would be, what make this this list that we have on screen of pedagogies particularly feminist? For example, participatory learning or validation of personal experience, critical thinking. What makes them feminist?
Yes. Well, participatory learning is actually good practice. In all kinds of education is good practice. And especially with adult learners, without participatory learning, it has been shown to be unproductive. If you just simply treat the other person as an empty vessel to whom you are just putting in knowledge, it's counterproductive. But I think for feminist pedagogies, we go one step further, which is that we actually expect to involve the participant in a dialogue about gender. That is, that with empathy, open-mindedness, and acceptance, we include participants in a conversation, in a dialogue about gender. The training is a space for co-creation, that we create meanings of gender and gender equality together, which doesn't mean that you as a facilitator have no role, that you do not have any power. That is not something, in fact, because you have power, you bring in the power of others. And of course, you always have this element of the pedagogy, which is about social justice and activism and accountability, which should be the main frame towards which. So not everything goes. Actually, it goes towards a particular goal. But you are not directive. If you can create this atmosphere, that is what is the most important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Franz?
Yeah, I can add to that. I mean, for me, it's an interesting term, participatory learning. It's one of those terms that we throw around in development. If you break it down, for me, the phrase, it's an adjective. Participatory is describing what sort of learning. And from a feminist pedagogical perspective, that now starts into questions about, well, whose knowledge counts and who is the knower? And so by using particular approaches, you're really counteracting hierarchies of knowledge. We have this idea that there are experts and knowers and people who need to learn. Well, if you're really embodying feminist principles and validating and valuing not only different experiences, but ways of knowing and ways of expressing and learning about knowledge, then you need to find ways to get to get that knowledge out and to A, get it out, and B, to generate knowledge. Because when we take a feminist perspective, it's not as if knowledge is a commodity that I give to you, Moitri, and you give to Leticia. No, it's something that is interrogated and evolves, and therefore you need to use particular methodologies to allow for that to come out. So I make a distinction between participatory learning and interactive learning. Some people think, oh, if we do small group work and activities, that's participatory learning. People interact. Is it participatory in terms of a generation of knowledge, uncovering of knowledge, building of knowledge? Not necessarily. So for me, that's why participatory learning has this particular meaning when we talk about feminist pedagogy.
Thank you both. I think it's a beautiful idea of training as a dialogue, no, and taking into account all the power that we bring to the training session. So I would continue with how can practicing principles of feminist pedagogy in gender training be a paradox? That was also our title for this session. So what would you say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we build upon that last idea and Moitri's idea that, participatory learning or validation experience doesn't mean everything goes. So everything counts. It is going to certain directions. So there's an agenda to it. But that's the first paradox. So how can you have something that's supposed to be open and inclusive, but there's a particular agenda? And that plays out very well in training. So it's not everybody's opinions. You're trying as a facilitator to shape those ideas and create reflection for a particular end. So the second paradox has to come around with the classroom itself and a feminist classroom. Does it mean everybody is equally valued and weighted and has the same power? No, a classroom is about power dynamics. Feminist pedagogy is about embracing power relations. But how do you do that from a position of power? And let's face it, when you come into a training, there'll be more senior people and less senior people. There are people from certain countries, people who speak English well, who don't speak English well, people who are sponsored by big organizations, and the people who come in as independents. You do come from different positionalities. So one of the paradoxes, how do you level the playing field from different positions of power? And that's, of course, in the design and the way you're getting the training across and knowledge across.
Yeah, I'm going to take another example, which is this element of in the feminist pedagogies, which is about the validation of personal experience. Does this mean, for example, yes, we talk about validation of personal experience, but does it mean that the whole training is just experiential, that everybody, whatever you say is your experience, is what is going to be discussed? Apparently not, because this is a training. And actually what this is about is validation of your the experience, your personal experiences coming from an entity, which is you, which is socially situated in a particular way. You may be a particular gender, you probably come from a particular class in a society where that class matters or doesn't matter. There are many other ways in which social inequalities, power privileges you or underprivileges you. And therefore your experience is very situated. And that's what we are validating. That the situatedness of your experience is very, very important. So it's not just experiential. The other thing is about development of critical thinking. Or yes, on the one hand, we want to help people who are coming to us, working in development, to mainstream gender into their sector or whatever development work they're doing. But no, it's not about taking the mainstream for granted. Okay, it's not about uncritically taking the mainstream for granted, because the mainstream itself, as Franz said earlier, is a social construct, and development could be done many ways and very differently. Development, the way it's being often done, is creating inequalities, hierarchies, etc., exclusions. It's doing it itself. So, in a sense, it's not mainstreaming gender into a mainstream about which we have no critique. No. So it's about actually trying to develop a sense of a gender perspective in a critique of that sector.
And one last element of that paradox, Moichi, is that absolutely, but the other paradox is we're embedded in that context. We make our
Yes.
livelihood from
Yes.
the very context of which we recognize as being not always conducive for social justice.
Yes.
Right? That's one of the tensions, particularly for trainers. That's how you make your living, right? That's how you get good ratings after your workshop, when people like your training. So how do you get people who do like your training when in fact you're also trying to get them to challenge themselves and challenge the context in which they're working?
That's great. Thank you both so much for these reflections. Before we move on, we have a little poll, a quick poll for the audience. The idea of this is to get to know each other a bit more, and that your answers will be completely anonymous though, but we would like to know a bit about the training experience of the audience. So I'm going to put them on your screens and read them. Know that you will have 30 seconds to reply to each of them. So I'm sorry, wait a second. Okay, our first question is, have you ever participated in a training related to your work? So some sort of professional development. And replies are coming on quickly. We have a few more seconds to reply.
I guess we should also mention there are 148 people participating, so we have quite a large sample.
Oh, yes, we do. Yes, we have 76% of the audience voted. We have a few seconds more, so please click yes or no. Okay, that's it. So we'll see the poll results. Okay, our results are 89% of the audience says yes, they actually participated in a training related to their work, and 11% of the 144 people said no. Okay, so moving on to our next question. Can we please upload that to the screen now? It's coming up. Great. So our second question is, of those who said yes, think of one particular training. Do you remember it fondly for whatever reason? If you remember any training fondly. Okay, questions coming up. So we're having a lot of participation today, Franz and Moitri. Thank you so much for that to everyone. We have a few more seconds to reply. Okay. Okay, so we have the results coming up. Yes, 86% said yes. They actually think fondly of one of those trainings for any particular reason, and 14% of those said no. No, they don't think fondly about those trainings. So we have our last question. It's going to be uploaded right away. Finally is, of those who said yes, do you remember the training as transformational? In other words, it helped you see your work in a fairly or radically different way. Responses are coming up. Great, thank you for participating. have 60% of the audience completing the poll by now. We have a few more seconds. This is the last questions. Okay. Now results coming up. 60% of participants who had trainings and who thought fondly of them believe they are transformational, and 40% of participants believe that they were not. So
That's quite
very
high.
interesting.
Yeah,
Quite
it is.
high.
It is quite high, but it's also 60% of 86% of the 89%. So if you have
Right.
144 people, it's actually not 60% of the 144. My math is not so good. But the point of that poll is to think about, is to introduce why we wanted to do this training, the professional development program for gender trainers. So an OECD report from 2 years ago recognized that actually $15 billion are spent annually on capacity development in the aid industry. That's 1/4 of ODA, and that's reported by The Guardian. And so the area of gender mainstreaming is not any different from any other area within development. Training is really the main policy response, not even capacity development, but training per se. And what we've certainly found in our own work in gender training is that, well, there are some gender trainings that people go to, some that they remember fondly, and some that they remember it as being transformatory, that it rocked your world, it changed the way you looked at development. And for us, that's the type of training that really captures the feminist potential of the thinking around gender training, harking back from the early 90s. We do feel that there's a lot of training that does not do that people don't walk out fondly, or that they did not see their world of development differently. And that for us is a bit of concern. Is going back to the initial ideas about feminist pedagogy, is that without critiquing and understanding how development as a paradigm can either challenge or reinforce gender inequities, our role as gender trainers needs to be questioned, and that's what we wanted to be doing within this program.
Thank you for your comments, Franz. Moitri, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think that's exactly what I would have said. Yeah. Let's go on.
Super. So moving on with our presentation, only a quick reminder to the audience, make sure you type in your questions. The sooner you do this, the more chance we'll have them to respond at the end. So please keep them coming up along with your participation, and thank you so much for that. So Moitri and Franz, my next question to you would be, how does the inspiration for the program relate to feminist pedagogies?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Actually, the inspiration comes from, first of all, and is related to feminist pedagogies, because that's precisely what we, in our long experience, found to be totally missing. In a sense, people were much of the training, gender training in development, was bereft of any conceptual underpinnings to feminist theories, to the experiences of women, to the essential things that we think people should know about why we do gender in development. And so therefore it was mainly that, as we said, people have learned it on the job, they've learned from other trainers, so they knew the methods, but not necessarily why we teach gender the way we do, which meant that they simply the whole pedagogy, the feminist theory, which animates our and is the rationale for our being gender trainers, was simply missing. And that is the reason why we brought together this course, to answer a need, because we felt there is a niche here, and there is a need here for a more political, in the sense of transformatory training, that is born from, or takes its departure from the reasons, from the theories, concepts that have to do with change and change in the gender order. So that's what we feel is the inspiration behind our feminist pedagogies.
Thank you, Moji. Would you like to elaborate on this, Franz?
No, that's okay. We can go to the next question. I can build it into the next.
Excellent. So our next question would be, what need does this program address?
Yeah. Well, as Moichi mentioned, that the few studies that have been done of gender advisors and gender trainers shows that most people have learned on the job. And if they do have some sort of formal education to become a gender specialist or a trainer, it's in a related, but not usually a very directed related discipline. So what we do find is that gender trainers become more or less, so let's say more or less, vehicles to convey ideas, and are not always having the experience, analytical capacities, or conceptual basis to help trainees interpret what they're trying to teach. So somehow there's a separation between a gender expert and a gender trainer. And we're trying to equip trainers with a conceptual fluency in the foundational ideas that underpin gender development work. So in many of our respects, I guess sometimes people were kind of old hats within this game of gender development. We do draw upon a lot of the ideas from that animated this work in the mid-90s, and come back to that in our own work and certainly within the program itself. But it's really having this fluency with these ideas. And what do I mean by fluency? Well, it's not just knowing them by memory. It's not just being able to, as definitions, but really understanding how you work with these concepts, these analytical concepts, in ways to bring insights and ways to understand what is it about the way we understand gender currently that is really doing us disservice. One very quick example is thinking of gender as a binary. Thinking of gender as a binary, as men and women, really has not done anything to further our analysis of what's happening as gender as a dynamic, as a social relation. It has become ossified as if you're just back to males and females. So what do we do about that? And that's what this training is about, trying to see how do we steer the thinking in a way that can really help us analyze and retain some of that original transformatory potential of these ideas. And how we do that is in the slide, where we have 3 domains, which is, as I mentioned, one is sort of conceptual depth and clarity, so this fluency, this feminist practice, and we should actually feminist praxis, so it's really feminist theory and practice coming together, and how these actually get manifested. So I don't want to even say operation, manifested as training skills and methods. So it's not as if you have methods out there and theory here. As you can see, these 3 circles come together, and that's what this training is about, is this interaction between concepts, values in terms of feminist practice, and the actual methods.
Thank you so much, Franz. Moichi, would you like to add something to this
No,
answer?
I think just that the whole idea is that these 3 domains work together, and our responsibility as facilitators would always be to keep everybody, you're an integrated whole, and this or two, it works together. How to move within these domains, like fluently without interruption.
Mm. Yep.
Great. So moving on to the next question is, who is this program for? What can people expect from the program?
Okay, we can actually tell you this now because we've just had one cohort. You see that in the picture. Those of you who got your visual on, you can see in the picture. Well, it's actually for people who have some experience of gender training, are experiencing some sort of lack or a hole or lack of energy, have been working in development. That's very important, I think. It's for them. And what can they expect from this? Well, they can re-energize their practice. They will gain conceptual clarity and be able to fluently combine concepts, ideas in their praxis, as we just said, as Franz just said. And that's what they can expect from the program, certainly to re-energize. That's what we found with all the people who came in the last cohort, that overall everybody's bottom line was that they felt totally re-energized. Also, actually, when you have people with such from varied concepts, but trying to do the same thing, which is forward agenda through training, then you have a peer group which works very closely and that is very creative. People learn from each other, and they said that. They also said how important that was in their learning process. So all of these things is what the program offers.
If we could add to that, so if we look at the photo, we have 25 participants in the first cohort from 21 countries, working with different agencies, from UN agencies to bilateral, multilateral agencies to private foundations to independent consultants, from small sort of subnational organizations. And what people can expect is a safe space. So these are people and ourselves as well as we make our livelihood as gender trainers and quote unquote experts. You position yourself as having a particular, expertise. That makes it very hard to kind of say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I've always thought about that. So what this program has allowed is for people to really find solidarity with each other and connectiveness and a safe place to say, I'm not really sure how that worked, or to give each other feedback and to grow first and foremost professionally, but also personally and their own trajectories within their personal lives and career wise. So it's getting back to the feminist pedagogies. This is being very much about the personal and the professional and how those interact for people's lives, and in some ways capitalizing on that, because people are gender trainers because of a passion, and this program is about refiring that passion and reclaiming that passion that sometimes gets lost with so many years of working, against the grain, as it were.
Thanks, Franz, for that, and also Moitri. So I believe this takes us to our next question. That is, how is the program structure? What is the role of the participants in the structure
Okay.
of the program?
So what you see now is the overview of the program, which I'll break down for you by module. It's a 6-month program. We can go to the next slide, consisting of 3 modules. And it's blended learning, which means some of it happens face-to-face and some of it happens virtually. So the first module, which is really looking at the theoretical perspectives of gender and development. This is the conceptual piece. 5 days in Amsterdam, full-time with your cohort group. And then you go into module 2, which is basically a virtual phase. And that lasts for about 5 months. And it consists of a homework assignment, which you do in a small group, focusing on a particular sector and learning to analyze from a feminist critical perspective, what is that sector saying or working with gender issues. And so you're doing small group work, you're working virtually, you're being tutored by the course instructors, you are presenting to the rest of your colleagues as part of this module, and supported by an external resource person who has expertise and specializes in that area. So last year we had Nala Kabir with the SRHR group. We had Naomi Gonda for the climate change group. We had Christine O'Callaghan for the agriculture group, etc. So we had a number of people who are specialized in areas to work along with you. Then we have Module 3. Module 3 consists of another assignment. It's an individual assignment where people work with support from the tutors to design, or in some cases redesign, a training that they were interested in, practice it if they have time, and then present their learnings from that assignment to their cohorts in the last week of the program, which again happens face-to-face in Amsterdam. So in summary, there are 2 one-week sessions in Amsterdam at the beginning of the program and at the end, and this is the last one, where we also look at more contemporary issues of training in gender and development, and there is some presentations and exams and the ending of the program. So in summary, blended learning, face-to-face, and virtual learning. Virtual learning happens in a one-on-one, in small groups, in a larger group, and also with tutorial support. Mixing the practical with the theoretical. So there's a lot of practice doing things.
That's a great overview, Franz. Thanks so much. Moitri, would you like to add something about this?
Yeah, just to pick up on the last last point that Franz said, this practice. So it's not just about skills. It is about skills, and no, it isn't about skills. It's about practice that is very grounded. And I think that people found those things, found the practice which we did in different ways, very very energizing, because they had not been asked to do this for a long time. For example, in the second module, where they have to actually unpack the particular development sector they are working in or would like to work in and want to know more about, it's about actually critiquing that sector from a gender perspective by choosing to analyze particular documents, etc. And this is group work. So people really were surprised that the shift from always giving answers or being programmatic to actually going back and saying, hold on, what does this document actually say about gender? And how is it being situated? You know, to suddenly analyze was a different hat, a different cup of tea altogether that they had to, you know. So that experience itself is extremely, and that is part of the practice. If you don't practice actually analyzing what the situation is, you won't do it. You just take it for granted. So practice not only of training skills, but practice also all that makes you a good trainer, including analysis. Okay.
Super. Thanks so much, Moitri. So we arrived to the million-dollar question, as they say. And it is, why should people choose this program for gender trainers and not others? I believe that many things that you said already answered these questions, but if you can try and reply.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat. I think what we've just said, Franz and I, are the reasons why we think that this particular program is different from others. That is, it is different from others because it just doesn't train you in skills, in the superficial, training. It's about training your mind as well as the way you facilitate a training program. As Franz already said, this is for gender trainers, but it's not a training of trainers. So we are not saying, okay, this is the only way to do gender training, and then you go and do that or that. It's about thinking through what is the situation you're in, and we are equipping you with how to do that, with skills of how to do that. to assess the situation you're training in, and how you would introduce gender. So that's why I think that this program, other than any others, is the one that does this. And we have it from people who have attended this course.
And just to say, I mean, recognizing there are different ways and different needs for trainers, and I think for people who are interested is to really try to figure out, is this something that you're at this particular point in your career wanting and needing? It could be that much more practical skills and the technical aspects of training as needed, which is fine. So I think it's also to manage expectations in a way. And this is not certainly so many things that it is, and perhaps things that are not. What you mentioned, it's not a training of trainers. It's not an echo training. So it's not something where we are training people and they're expected to train exactly what we trained other people on, right? It's really about building these foundational skills in ways that they can apply in other contexts, and who really want to be engaging in ideas and concepts themselves. So I think people should keep that in mind, and feel free to reach out and ask us if you're not sure. But we really want to make sure that people know what they're getting involved in, so that so they won't be also disappointed.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. So I believe I have arrived to the last question I have for you today, and that is a more practical consideration. Where can I find more information about this course and registration and all the details?
Right. Okay. Well, the registration page is on the KITS website, but you just have to Google PDPGT at KITS, or gender training at KITS, and you'll see the main page where you can register, but also, which this page is highlighted, for further reading, if you wanted to read a bit more about the some of the pieces that we've written leading up to the development of this program, which was basically developed over a year. There's a mapping and a review about how we situate this training, these other training, and where we found that there was a niche or a need. There is a sort of more conceptual piece that explains some of the thinking behind the thinking for those of you who are interested. And of course, on this page, you have the basic start dates. Registration closes on March 29th. And on the top left-hand corner is the apply now, fairly straightforward application process that you can do quite quickly.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Franz. So would you like to add something, Moitri, or maybe a final comments before we proceed to the Q&A with the participants?
No, so as we've already said, you have to see at which stage you're at and what is your need for training. And if you feel that you want to be re-energized and want to renew your basis for doing gender training, well, we would very much like to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to proceed now to put our questions, the questions that we have received today, on the screen for you to read.
Great.
Just a moment, please. Okay, here it is. Okay, we are having
Wow.
a lot of questions today. So yes, great. Thank you for participating to everyone. So
Right.
I'm going to stop here. Can you read them, Franz and Moitri?
No.
It's not big enough.
Okay, now it says better.
I can read
Okay.
number 8, but that's fine. We can deal with those and then maybe move down a
Okay,
bit.
maybe from 1 to 7, and then I'll scroll down. Let me know.
Okay.
So
Right.
you can start with whatever question you feel like answering first.
Okay. Right.
Yes, let's give them a moment to read.
Maybe I'll just, while Mochi's reading, I can just stop one. So thanks, Leah, for talking about pedagogy depressed. Absolutely. I mean, this really, some of the original feminist pedagogical work draws from Fair's pedagogy of the oppressed and builds upon it. Fair was criticized in some ways for not really being completely gender sensitive as he could have been, but certainly in the basic ideas about well, the political role of education and teaching, and how it's not a neutral, necessarily beneficiary social act. and how it can be also certainly our critique of certain types of gender training, not necessarily promoting of gender justice and equality, the way gender is being taught. Certainly in terms of Frere's idea of banking education as opposed to problem-posing education, certainly we take our cues from Frere, and other, of course, adult education or learner-centered ideas. Again, as we talked about at the beginning, but what makes us particular feminists? Well, as we already explained, that it's extending from there, and we draw upon a lot of feminist theory in thinking about that.
Okay. I'll go back to the first one, because the first one is thank you, Whitney. And it's about really a pushback on gender discussions, and it's about resistance in gender training. It can be your own cultural background, it can be a different cultural background. And I think the resistance often to gender, citing our culture, our culture is different and we, whatever, is always a symptom of feeling attacked, feeling somehow that gender is being used as something to look down upon you. And so I would say that, yes, there may be a pushback, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk about gender. I think there are many ways of dealing with situations like this, especially when the resistance comes from so-called culture. I think it's important to, first of all, acknowledge there's a cultural difference, but that every culture has its own way of talking about gender, and we would like to know how you talk about gender. So that would be taking the steam out of the really kind of tight situation, and actually meaning it. The other way, of course, because you're talking about development and etc., it's always important to explain the concept of gender if, in terms of their work, and equality in terms of their work. We had one participant whose colleagues were, she was from the same culture as her colleagues, were extremely, I mean, they actually harassed her because she was the gender trainer for the organizations besides having other jobs. She was a gender specialist and so was expected to be the trainer. And she said, can I, and she said, you just have to say the word gender and nobody wants to come to the training. So I said, okay, what does your organization do? Okay, we help farmers. I said, okay, why don't you start like that? How to reach your beneficiaries? And then, who are your beneficiaries? Do that, try that. So there are many ways in which you can always make this resistance, not avoid it, but take it up, but in a meaningful way, so it's productive. Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to take John's question about intersectionality and try to touch upon Anna's question about, fair enough, Anna, challenging us about how we're making a distinction between adult learning principles. Well, I mean, adult learning principles don't exclusively deal with issues of intersectionality. And John, yes, it's very important, but what do we mean by intersectionality? Intersectionality, and I'm glad you brought up the example of social inclusion, can be a very pleasant way of talking about diversity. What it doesn't allow for is actually understanding intersectionality as it's about power and how power is created and reproduced. And in that way, going back to Anna's question about, it's taking the idea of participatory learning. Well, how do you take about participatory learning when you're understanding differences? And what does that mean actually in gender training? And what we do know in gender training is that this binary of men and women is consistently and continuously reproduced. That doesn't really allow for any intersectional analysis. And so if you are using adult education and trying to embrace this, what would be, I think, a fairly strong feminist idea of intersectionality, one needs to understand feminist pedagogies from that perspective. In fact, it is really very much of a core of it. And it's not, once again, a layering of different identities. Sorry, my window's open. But it's really understanding intersectionality from a power structure and reproduction of power perspective, and understanding it from an analytical point of view. So absolutely, intersectionality is part of this work and thinking about this work, and but not thinking it from a technical perspective. Also, how it from a social power relations perspective.
Thank you so much, Franz. Moitri, would you like to add something on that? I'm going to scroll down then to have the next the rest of the questions shown.
Okay, we'll come back to the scholarship questions at the end, I think.
Okay.
Okay, we can come back to the logistic questions at the end. Okay, from 6 onward now we have on
Okay, I
screen.
think I'm going to deal with Elizabeth Hoffman's number 7.
Excellent, please go.
Yeah, isn't there an enormous gap between what we are defending, because you include yourself, and what the organization hiring us for training wants? Not to speak about training expectations. Do they come to the training to get transformed? I doubt so. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I take it all on board. First of all, I would not say we are defending anything. We are thinking through with participants actually what it means, what gender means. So we are not defending. And it may be different from what you can always tune into what the organization wants. The organization generally has a mandate that they have to, by their donors, they've been told by their donors or whoever, they've been told that they have to put everybody through gender training. And that's what gets received at the trainee end, that they have to go to this thing. But we can make that a bit more active. We can make what has become a mandate a little more active, a little more energy laden. We can use the opportunity, the circumstances of the organization, the context which the organization is in, what it is addressing, as our very tools to actually unpack gender. And through participatory learning processes, and here I hope there was somebody who was saying, "I'm sorry, but what is special about participation in feminist pedagogies?" I'd like to say, actually, it is very special. It's very special because this is practically, Elizabeth, going to be the only opportunity for people in an organization to talk about gender. And you'll see that all kinds of inequalities will get discussed if you can open up this space to a critical thinking. That has been our experiences, and there are ways of doing it. But the person doing it has to be very secure. They have to use every single opportunity, the context, the organization, what it does, in order to put forward the key agenda.
Thanks.
Okay.
I think, Marie, that kind of speaks to this particular issue. So I want to acknowledge your I'm not sure what the question is, but your statement. I think it sort of speaks to that. And John, I won't answer another of your questions out of fairness to others, but let me get to Juliana's. So I think, Juliana, what you're basically saying is why were all of the participants except one women? And certainly in terms of the facilitators and resource people, all have been women except myself, being a man. Absolutely. It's a bigger issue that doesn't get dealt with in this program in as much as we don't certainly prioritize women over men. We're not, actively selecting some participants over others. There are a number of criteria, then you could take a feminist approach and say, well, what criteria are you using that's inclusive or exclusive? But certainly in looking for people who have had a minimum 3 years of, of substantial gender training experience. First of all, there aren't going to be that many men to do that. Secondly, it's also about, we deal with this issue about what about men and men working in gender development, and certainly welcome and supportive and recognize the need for that. Does that mean that this particular course should be, sort of reverse discrimination, having different criteria for men to get more men in? In this particular case, I personally would agree no. And in part, which we deal with in the program, is what I think we have not figured out, I'm not sure who the we are, except men working in gender development, really figured it out. How do we work in issues of, definitely fine to be working with feminist principles, but issues of gender and equity from the particular positions that we come from? And does it happen in this particular way? I'm not completely sure about that. So absolutely right in your observation of that most of the participants are women, most of the resource people are women. That is where right now where the substantial base of experience is from which we're trying to tap into and draw upon. Moitri, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to add, the gender facilitator, whatever you'd like to call the person who's actually conducting the training. I mean, think about it. There is a hierarchy of power and privilege. And in our jobs also, there's a hierarchy of power and privilege. It's not extraordinary to see most of the powerful jobs in our organizations occupied by men. It's not, gender just is not one of those careers. And it's not attractive for that reason. So there's a practical reason also why men don't become the gender trainers. And I'm not sure that gender is the only form of diversity. If you look at our cohort, the number of contexts and organizations that people came from, different kinds of organizations, also was a huge form of diversity. And that provided so much learning ground that we would like to have more men, but more men who take gender seriously. And we at least try to provide an example, because it's me and Franz who've initiated this course, and we are the facilitators. Yeah.
So thank you both. That's very interesting. We have to think about ways of having more men included or encouraging participation. So would you like to...
Can you move up? Can you move the
Sure.
questions up? Thank you.
Sure.
Just see whether we have a little bit of time.
Yes, we do still have a bit more time. So there are a couple of questions about registration and scholarships.
Yes,
we also
maybe
have to get
Franz,
to.
you should just address
Okay.
that before we
Right.
down.
We have
Scholarships.
question number 4. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we appreciate that and are trying to work at that this program that we're offering is available to some, but not all. So it's available to those who are working with the organizations that can afford it, which primarily mean international organizations or northern-based organizations. We also recognize that there are certain people who, if their organizations can't pay, they personally can pay or not pay. And there are certainly, that excludes certain people and includes others. So what we've been doing about that is trying to look for scholarships. It's not easy. We are in the process of that, and we hope to be able to secure, well, we actually have secured one scholarship through the Dutch Orange Knowledge Program, and we are in discussions with other organizations. And so my suggestion is for those who are interested but can't afford or cannot see how they could afford to participate in the program, which we recognize is not cheap, is that they should still apply get through the registration to the application process, and when we can hopefully announce their scholarships, then they go through that particular process. And it's the only thing I can say I can recognize is in this day and age of the way development is funded, these funding scholarships has been quite difficult, and we do recognize that we are actually excluding, because of the fee, certain people who would probably benefit and would like to apply. Registration process, I don't see what the question is, Leticia.
Yes, sorry, friends, that's actually a bit below. So maybe we can go to that and then
Please
go back
scroll
to any
down.
questions
Yes.
if you want. Yes, I'm going to scroll
Please
down.
go. Yeah. A little
Okay.
more.
I arrived to the bottom now. We have 15 questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
We can certainly share bibliography. Certainly, we can make the reading list available of what we do cover, and that also gives people an idea. So this program is again meant for people who are not necessarily within their first steps. I think someone said beginners. I won't use that term. And the reason being is that it is the learning comes from a people bringing experiences upon which they can build upon, reflect upon, and engage with. And it's just the nature of this particular program. So it's not meant for people who are just entry-level trainers or who do not have experience with gender and development. The idea is to really be re-energizing and refreshing and reclaiming for those who got into development for particular reasons and have sort of lost that light for them. So that's who the course is for.
thanks so much, friends. Yeah, would you like to add something to this, Moitri?
Yeah, well, there are lots of questions here from people who say, well, shouldn't we start from the beginning? Who are, people who are just starting off, they would benefit from the theory practice combination that we are trying to do. Yes, it is true, but I think we did have quite a few very young participants, not that experienced in the first cohort. But what we're trying to do is, first of all, give preference to people who have at least 3 years of experience. And somebody has said, how can a mainstreaming project specialist benefit from this program? Depends what your job is. And if you're not a trainer, we did have some gender advisors from the UN at our training. So if you're a trainer at least, or you're working on gender, you have to be working on gender. That's one of the criteria of selection. Then please do write to us and we'll check it out.
Yeah. Can I just get back to the question about new gender trainers? And I think the other response I'd like to give is that I'm not sure if doing a program this way is suitable for learning how to do gender training. How does one then do that? Well, it's about working with a colleague. It's about co-training. It's really getting those practical experiences in, and that doesn't happen virtually, and it doesn't happen within a 1-week program. So in some ways, even the design of this would do a disservice to those who are sort of beginner trainers. I think there's all sorts of other ways to become a trainer, and just working with others and supporting and assisting and slowly building up your repertoire is another way of doing it. So it's more hands-on than than what we offer within the 6 months.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I just wanted to say, Moitri, that
the time
yes,
is up.
Time is almost up, so we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to address it because we've run out of time, but there was a very interesting question on youth. And somebody talked about young people, that she works with young people. It all depends, and it's a long session that we have to have with you. But I think that our program does address the core issue that is problematic in the question that you have posed, which is how to look at in the intersecting issues in the way in which gender is manifested. So yeah, we cannot now deal with this, but there you have it. It's possible to do that.
Thanks so much. Do you have anything to add, Franz, or any other question
Nope.
you want to reply as a last final
Yeah,
comment?
I'm fine. Just thank you everybody for their participation and questions. Very stimulating, and I guess these are the sort of type of issues and questions that we get involved in, but on a much more sort of ongoing and dialogical basis and in different venues. So if you liked the way this kind of unfolded, then that certainly is the vibe of the program. It is very dialogical.
Yes,
So
and so
please get in touch when you have time.
of course, thank you both so much again for being here with us and sharing these experiences and reflections. And also, I would like to thank the audience for their amazing participations, all the comments. We have received them all. Unfortunately, we run out of time, but we can follow up through email. Please make sure to send up any questions or comments you may have. So that's it for today. Here is our general email. You also have my email and our website as well as Kids. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon at the Professional Development Program for Gender Trainers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.
I
Thanks.
appreciate it.